I think that it is a need and an opportunity for us all to live our lives with purpose, because we don't know how long we have. We don't know what's ahead of us. And we have so many gifts and talents to offer. But it is very easy to get stuck in the structures of our lives, as you were mentioning, our to-do lists, our obligations, our responsibilities, and not gain awareness for long enough to decide to focus our talents in a way that matters to us and that matters to the world around us. So I work with Mindfulness Incubator.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Sleep Like a Boss podcast. I'm super excited to have Stephanie here from the Mindfulness Incubator. Hi, Stephanie.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
I'm so excited for this conversation because we're going to talk about the topic of overwhelm today. And that is something I see in women all the time. I saw it in my career in HR back in the day. I see it with my clients a lot, that life just puts so much onto our plates and we take so much on that we often get to a point of, I don't know how to do this anymore. I'm like with my back to the wall. I'm burning out.
Yeah.
My to-do lists are never ending. And we want to kind of dive into that topic today because that's your passion to help women deal with this. And so I'm super excited about that. And before we start, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's your story?
Yeah. So my name is Stephanie. I, by day, am a senior director at a global tech company. And my side passion project is working with women who are looking for ways to live with a little bit more ease and a little bit more intention and a little bit more purpose. I think that it is a need and an opportunity for us all to live our lives with purpose, because we don't know how long we have. We don't know what's ahead of us. And we have so many gifts and talents to offer. But it is very easy to get stuck in the structures of our lives, as you were mentioning, our to-do lists, our obligations, our responsibilities, and not gain awareness for long enough to decide to focus our talents in a way that matters to us and that matters to the world around us. So I work with Mindfulness Incubator, which is a platform that has exactly this purpose, helping people live with more intention and ease. And I think overwhelm is a topic that is important and very personal to me as well, as the work of understanding overwhelm and how to navigate through it and how to find ways to live with joy and ease, even in a world where there's just so much to do all the time, is something that I've had to do out of necessity rather than because it's something on the periphery, right? It's very central to, I think, what so many of us are going through right now. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's great. I think it's so, but it also always sounds so distant, I think, or not achievable to a lot of us. It's like, oh my God, I'm maybe a mom, I'm a partner, I work probably somehow, either I don't know, homeschooling my kids, run my own company, work in a corporate environment, might be managing people, have parents who might not be doing well. Like, it just sometimes seems so much. And is that something that you can relate to? Like, is that something where you're saying this passion project of mine is actually born out of personal experience?
It absolutely is. And, before I'll tell you a little bit about my story, but I think before jumping into that, I think one of the things that is often a challenge for us in how we think about overwhelm and even living with purpose and intention is we look at it as a binary thing. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And if you can't do it perfectly, then does it even matter that you're making an effort? And I think that thinking is one of the things that holds us back. I think managing overwhelm, managing ease is one of the things that we have to think about as a gradual journey where small improvements over time make a big difference. So it's not about whether you're doing it right or wrong, whether you're overwhelmed or not. It's about this small daily, weekly, monthly practices that you can implement to help bring you further along on a journey to being more whole and more well. But to go back to my story, so I have 8-year-old twins. that are in elementary school. I have a 1-year-old puppy. I have a husband who's been sick all week. And a lot of my focus in the space of physical health and wellness, mental health and wellness, and well-being overall was really triggered, evolved by some of my personal experiences dealing with kind of acute stress environments or emotional turmoil environments. And it really started about 15 years ago when my father was diagnosed with a rare cancer that he fortunately had a great outcome for. And part of how I dealt with the circumstance at that stage was looking at what are the things that we could do to help promote our health, our well-being, and our healing. So that was sort of the initial kickoff. And then I continued my journey of learning and personal development in that space. And 2 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with ALS, which is a really terrible neurodegenerative disease for which there's no cure. It is one of those experiences where you just know that every day is going to be a little bit worse than the day before until the end. And we lost her about a year ago. My mom was a person who lived life on her own terms. She wrote her own rules. She was an author. She was a course creator. You know, she lived in multiple different places. It would not be uncommon for her to up and move to Honduras for a couple of years because that's what she wanted to do. And it just helped clarify and crystallize for me the extent to which you could have all the intent in the world for what you want to create with your life, but you just don't know what's ahead of you. You don't know how long you have. You don't know what challenges and obstacles will be placed on your path. And it's so important to live in the present moment with intention. And it's so important to live the life that you have, this one precious life, with purpose. And so part of the reason why I do this work is to honor her legacy and to encourage other women like her to bring their gifts into the world and to live our life in the way that brings us joy and brings those around us and the communities that we live in joy as well.
Which, like, it just, when you just listen to you say that, it just lights me up, and it's like, yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the tools for resilience. And this does not work in every context, and for everyone, but it's to be able to rewrite the narrative and make meaning out of things that feel absolutely awful. And to say, okay, this is how I'm going to grow as a person and give into the world as a result of this terrible thing that happened. It's not trying to silver line, and it's not trying to say everything happens for a reason, because some things are just awful and they're terrible and there's no reason for them. But to be able to say, how will I grow as a human, and what will I put into the world to make the spaces that I'm in better as a result of this experience that I've been through, is one of the tools to help us go through things that are really difficult.
Yes. And we didn't talk about that before, but I just mentioned that I had burnout, and that was also trauma induced. So there was a big emotional component to it. And it's exactly that. I think when you start working through this, it's exactly what you described, is we often strive for this perfection. And I think a lot of us women in professional roles that are successful, like, we got there somehow, and we got there through hard work and doing things right. And we then just trying to take a step back and doing these things slowly and not overstretching it, because we're already at a limit. We're trying to go from at a limit a little further out, like we're into a stretch, a tiny stretch out of our comfort zone, to make that comfort zone bigger, right? And to create these habits that will create that ease and find that purpose. But how would you, do you have like a practical example of something, what that could look like? Because I think it sounds great, but for someone who's like in the midst of chaos right now, like,
middle of it.
Yeah, managing their career, trying to get the kids an education, feeding them, getting the house in a decent space, being a good partner, like, how
Make sure there's clean socks and underwear.
Exactly. Like, where do we even start?
Yeah. And I would separate two things. There is the practices that we can implement to build our ability to withhold and sustain being overloaded for extended periods of time. And that's kind of the category that we call resilience, the things that you can do every day so that when something happens, that's like one more thing on top, right? The car breaks down, your kid is sick on a big day that you have at work and you don't have childcare, something else happens, your ability to withstand is bolstered by a set of resilience boosting practices. And we could talk about what those are. They're things like mindfulness and meditation and looking after your physical health through your nutrition, your sleep quality, your movement, your social networks, your ability to adapt your mindset, as we were talking about, to step out of rumination and into, okay, what can I do about this and what can I not do, and making peace with the two. So there's a set of things that we could build, small habits that might feel like nothing on any given day, that when you do them over time, help you sustain and withstand and endure when things are difficult. And then there's what I call the like overwhelm 911, which is when you're in it, what do you do? And those are slightly different things, right? Because like when you're in it, some of those ongoing practices aren't necessarily going to help you get out of it. So maybe we could start with what do you do when you're in it?
Yes, do the 911.
The 911. So there's a framework that I really like called the overwhelm self-rescue framework, and we can share it if it's helpful here. And the very first step is recognizing that you're in overwhelm. And that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but it is a very hard thing to do, because when you're in overwhelm in the moment, you are flooded, you are in fight or flight, and you are not your highest and best self, right? You might have the reaction to run, you might have the reaction to argue or to poke or to debate, or you might just have the reaction to do nothing and you're frozen. You feel paralyzed and you can't do anything. And so step number one is, how do I recognize that I am currently actively in overwhelm? What's going on with me? And there was a really interesting, I can't remember which book I read it in. I was like, I love to read, and so sometimes they all mush together. They had run an experiment playing a card game. And in the control group, they played the game. And in the test group, the game was rigged. And the cards it was not fair. And what they were noticing people's physiological response to the game. And what they observed was that the people who had the rigged card deck had a physiological response, like their heart rate would go up, or their temperature would change, or their blood pressure would change far before intellectually people realized something was up. So their bodies were triggering, like, there's something wrong here. This is not fair. And the reason I bring that example up is, when we talk about gaining awareness that we're in overwhelm, the first tell is often a physical one. There's something that happens when you get in that state. Like maybe you feel a pressure in your chest. Maybe your armpits get sweaty. Maybe you feel, your shoulders tense up, or you have a knot in your stomach. Like there's something that happens. So for you, if it's your shoulders, beginning to realize that is the thing that happens, and getting in tune with that might help you realize, oh, I'm sliding into overwhelm earlier. And so the first step is realizing this is happening to me, and be able to say, oh, I am currently in overwhelm. I need to calm myself down because I am not my most resourceful self right now. And so what can I do in this moment to bring myself back to center so that I have more resources available to me to deal with the situation? So, step one is awareness. And it is very important to start there, because you can't do anything until you realize that you've got a situation going on. Then you need to calm your nervous system down to move out of that fight or flight. And you do that by practicing something that is a self-rescue step. And for you, that might be breathing in and out deeply. It might be box breathing. Maybe you can go for a walk. Maybe you can stare outside at the sun. Maybe you could look at a joke. There's a variety of different ways that you can make an intervention that will help your nervous system come back down. And they don't have to be long, right? It could be I'm just going to go to the restroom right now. You go to the restroom, you do like 3 box breaths. Do you know what a box breath is?
Yeah.
Great. So you inhale, you hold it, you exhale, you hold it, you inhale, you hold it, you exhale, you hold it. And there was some interesting data recently to suggest that that can be as effective as an anti-anxiety pharmaceutical, as an intervention to try to bring down your nervous system. So you could do that in like 1 minute in the bathroom. So an intervention that will help you bring your nervous system down. And then that puts you in a position where you could tackle the issue at hand. So if it's something that you can solve in the moment, solve it. If it's something that you need to address systematically, address it. And oftentimes you just have to endure the situation and you actually can't do anything about it. But here's the great part about executing an overwhelmed self-rescue is that even if you can't change the situation, you could choose who you want to be in the situation. So what I mean by that is if you're in a scenario where you're having a very difficult professional conversation, maybe you're dealing with some budget cuts, maybe you're dealing with some layoffs, maybe you're dealing with some very difficult trade-offs, and you can't change the fact that you're in that situation, but you could choose to enter the conversation as your most empathetic and resourceful self. And you could choose to be a person who lifts their colleagues up in those discussions and tries to find the situation that is most respectful of all of the considerations. So you could choose who you want to be in that situation, even if you can't change it. But it all starts with, you first got to realize that that's going on and that you're in that mode so that you can then take steps to bring yourself back down so that you have more available to you to address the situation at hand.
This is a really great explanation. And I think what so often happens, what I see women often do, is like, okay, I'm just going to go. I'm going to run to the bathroom. I'm going to bring my phone. I'm just going to scroll social media for 5 minutes. And that's exactly not what we're trying to do. We're trying to really take a moment and we're talking 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be half an hour of meditation. That's not what, really small breaks where you don't consume more information.
Yep. Yep.
Right. Where you're giving your system a moment to breathe. Mm-hmm. Literally, that's what it is.
Yep. And there are also some really short and snappy, like 1 or 2 minute meditations that you could do that are specifically a mind settling or a physical relaxing meditation that if you have it on your phone, you put an earbud in, you breathe, you listen, you settle down, and then you go back out into the world. And you might think that that's not going to make that big of a difference, but that is incorrect. It makes a huge difference.
And I see that a lot also. That's a conversation I often have with my clients if they struggle with sleep. It's this, if we go all day, we're not going to fall asleep because we're still in full on go mode. We need these little breaks throughout the day for the body to self-regulate.
Yeah.
And often we just, like, we push through and then comes the overwhelm. And then we have exactly that. I don't have time to do that. But that's exactly what you just said. It's like, no, you have to push the brake. And it's actually an investment that pays back big time after, because you're in a better state than you were when you went in.
Yeah. And there are things that I think are not time takers, they're time makers.
Yeah.
Sleep is in that category. Some forms of movement are in that category. And I do think also mindfulness and self-rescue exercises are in that category, which is how much more productively, effectively, presently, that's the word, can you show up in your conversation as a result of having invested these moments to do these things for yourself. And there again, there's good data to support that after you go for a walk, you're more productive, you're more aware, and you're more resourceful to be able to tackle the problems at hand. And so perhaps you took 10 minutes to walk around the block, but the remaining 50 minutes, if they're 25% more productive, then you've more than made up for that 10 minutes. Yeah. And I think it's a mindset shift around how we think about where our time is going and measure this. And I think that this is a bit of a tangent, but related, this expectation that exists in our society and many of the constructs that we exist in, that our effectiveness and value is derived from how busy we are, how many meetings we're in, how many emails we have, how many after school activities we're going, what and it's almost become a bizarre status symbol when people are like, oh, how are you? I'm so busy. I'm so busy. I am so busy. Right. And almost not saying that comes across as like, wow, that's weird. But the amount of time, of the percentage of our days that are occupied by stuff does not necessarily correlate to doing work or living a life that has meaning. You could do the same amount of work in an hour and a day, and you'd be busy during that day. It doesn't mean it's better. And it also doesn't mean it's worse. And so shifting our mindset on how we use our time and not necessarily seeing some of these interventions as a time expense, but as a time investment that creates a positive effect that then helps you live the remainder of your time more intentionally, more thoughtfully, and from a more resourceful place, because you're not like, I gotta go, which is not where we do our most creative work, let's just say.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, well, you are clearly also a very busy person. You work in tech. That's not the calmest of all businesses to be in. Slightly fast moving and very competitive. And you have twins. You do everything that you do with the Mindfulness Incubator. So you have a lot on your plate, and you talk about purpose. And I think from the passion on how you talk about it, yeah, that is one of your purposes, and how you explain about your mom and how you want to carry on the way she was living her life, which I think is fantastic. How do you do all that? Overwhelm is one thing. I think another thing that often comes, and we didn't talk about that before, but this just comes to my mind. This question of guilt, especially for women, comes up a lot.
Yeah.
How do you link that with purpose? Yeah. And everything you're trying to do? If you know what I'm trying
to do. So I'm going to take a left turn and I'll come back. So
okay.
When the twins are first born, I had an opportunity at work to take on a bigger job. And they asked me the question. They said, do you want to do this thing that's going to be bigger? Or do you want to keep doing this other thing that I was doing before I went on mat leave? And the twins were born early. So it was a bit of a traumatic experience for the first 8 weeks. I think the longest contiguous stretch I ever slept was 42 minutes. It was like hazing. But when I came back to work, my philosophy was, I haven't been in a position where I could do everything that I wanted to do on any given day for years, right? There's been more to do than I have time for. And so I've been in a state of ruthless prioritization for a long period of time. And so if my capacity is this much, this is a plate, I'm going to do a plate. If I have a plate that is this size, I could fill that plate with really big, important things that are going to make a difference for a lot of people. Or I could fill that plate with less important things that I already know how to do and that I've been doing for some time. And I want to be clear here that there's no right or wrong answer to this, because making the choice to do something that feels more reasonable for you in a moment of life where things are difficult is a reasonable choice that needs to be celebrated, right? People saying, nope, I'm good, that's enough for me. That is great. The only way to go in life should not be up and to the right or left, right? It should not always be about progression and doing more, because I don't think that is a healthy state. But in that moment, the way that I looked at the question was, I have a certain amount of hours in a day, and I get to choose how I spend them. And I want to spend them in a way that's going to feel really exciting and motivating. Otherwise, why am I even here? And that is the mindset that I've had for the last 10 years, 15 years, many years it's been, of on any given point in time, you have to prioritize. There are too many things to be done. And so you have to choose where you put your energy and your effort, and the places where your focus, your intervention is going to make the biggest difference, because there is a near infinite volume of things that is competing for your time and your attention and your awareness. And you can either build your life from the bottom up or from the top down. And what I mean by that is you could build your life by saying, all right, I'm going to do all the things that are being asked of me. And then with the time that's left, I'm going to see what I can do. I'm going to rest. I'm going to do things that are fun. I'm going to develop hobbies, whatever that might be. I'm going to do philanthropic work. Or you could build it from the top down that says, okay, here are the things that I want to do. And the places where my energy and my effort's going to make a difference. And with what's left, I'll look at the other things that are being asked of me. It sounds way more simple than it actually is when you say it that way. But I think I try, and this is a daily, hourly practice, to build it from the top down, to say, okay, what are the priorities? What are the things that are important? And then what do I do about everything else? And this was the kind of these ideas and these concepts informed a program that Mindfulness Incubator recently ran, and I think we'll do again. I'm actually facilitator for a big chunk of it on time boundaries. It's this construct of how do you manage your time? How do you create time boundaries? How then can you be present for the time that you do have, so that it's not about quality. It's not about quantity. It is about quality. So that's sort of that was a long road on the there's just too much to do. And so how do you philosophically approach it? On the guilt front, that's a lifelong journey. You always have the voice in your head of like, you should. And I think it's like any other, for me, I'll tell you about my personal experience. Everyone is different. It is about, there are two things that I continuously focus on, and it's mindset and practice. And mindset in this regard is shifting how I look at the things that I do that may not fit within that construct as something that's selfish to something that's necessary to fill my cup so that I could show up in meaningful ways. I recently read Eve Rodsky's Unicorn Space. Have you read that one? And she talks about this quite a bit around like, it's not a nice to have, it's a requirement. And so that kind of, the more that we have that discourse publicly about what it takes for us to show up as our best selves in our work constructs, family constructs, partnership constructs, the easier it becomes for us to say, no, that makes sense for me to do. That's important. It's not selfish. It's necessary. But I struggle with it like everybody else does, the voice that propels you to try to do more and be better and show up differently. And but I think it's practice, and then looking at it as not an obligation, but a choice. I don't know if that made sense.
Yes, it does. And I think sometimes when you're like in the midst of it and in that overwhelmed situation, it might sound so, like you said, philosophical.
Yeah.
But I think it's really that acknowledging it happens to all of us. And I think, like you were also saying, society is still, and often organizations are still at that place where that kind of might get you some funny looks, maybe a comment here and there, if you even have a conversation like that. Because I think I'm so glad that you have that mindset and you're in a big organization where you can make that change. But I think sometimes that might be something where women might struggle if they don't have the support, at least in the workplace, to do these things. But it isn't, like you said, it's about, there's so many spaces in our lives where we can do these things and where we can start to think about what's important for us. Like, where is a boundary? And maybe it's not a hard cut in the beginning, and maybe it involves conversations with people, right? Like talking to people. It's like not to, as of today, I'm doing the world different. Everybody else is like, oh my God, what is she doing? Right? Like this is going to be a process. And but I think it's such an important one, and these small steps to come out of that. We just got to start somewhere. If we don't start somewhere, then it's just not going to change, because society isn't going to change as fast as our life progresses, I think. Yeah.
And going back to something we were talking about at the very beginning, like it's not binary, right? It's not you're either doing it or not. There's a lot of ways in which you can make small interventions and changes. And I'll share a couple of observations on the professional front. I think that there are a lot of instances where, especially women, but not exclusively, over justify and ask for permission in places where they could just do stuff, right? And so I think that goes back to the mindset piece a little bit of, you don't need permission to do some of these things for yourself. Like, you don't need permission to go to the bathroom and take some breaths or to go for a short walk. Although, in certain rare instances where you have a very regulated workday with prescribed breaks, like, it could be more tricky. But for many people, there's a lot of things that you could do without asking anybody for permission. And then I think those are a lot of simple habits and practices that can also really help you manage your workload that a lot of people don't do. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you're being asked to deliver a thing, an analysis, a presentation, a workshop, whatever it might be. And there are two clarifying questions that many people don't ask. First is, when do we need this? And the second one is, like, what's the resolution that we need it at? So, for example, if you're providing an analysis, often there's going to be the 1 hour answer based on very rough data, then the half day answer, the 1 day answer, and then the 2 week answer that requires building a data set, that requires a whole bunch of stuff. And there's often a belief and an assumption that, like, oh, well, you're asking for this, so it must be important. And therefore, I'm going to give you the best possible version that I could come up with, which is generally the 2 week answer. And it turns out that the 1 hour answer would have been fine. And there's places in our lives where we don't pause to say, okay, well, what's the appropriate amount of effort? What's the minimum requirement to hit your need? And to then have, as a secondary practice, the trade-off conversation to say, okay, I could do that. Here's what I need to push out, or here's what I need to not do, or here's the meetings that I can't show up to, or the regular deliverable that now is going to come next week, or that we're going to skip. Does that make sense? And if the answer is no, then you're talking about an impossibility, and you're saying, okay, then what are our alternatives? Can we ask somebody else? Can we get additional resourcing? Can we change the ask? Whatever it might be. And again, it's like a overly simplified version of life. But when you get in the habit of saying, okay, well, what's the minimum that I need to do to hit this requirement? And what am I trading off in order to do it? Just the practice of making those two things explicit is hugely impactful.
Yeah.
Impactful. That's a word, right?
Yeah.
It's a word in tech for sure. And so those are not big things, right? And you could say, okay, I'm going to start doing that today. And that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to do anything different, but I'm going to start building an awareness that maybe wasn't there before. And over time, awareness is the gateway to every big transformation that exists in the world. That's what I think. That's why mindfulness is so important, right? Because mindfulness is the trained practice of attention and awareness, and being aware of what's happening is the only way that you could change things. That's my view anyway.
Great. So we talked about earlier about, like, being aware that you're in that situation, that this overwhelm is coming on, how to take a quick break from that, how to step away from that situation. And that could even be exactly what you just said. Somebody comes and you're like, oh my God, here comes the requirement that I know I can't fulfill. And if you're in that moment, step away from it for a little while and then come back and have that conversation, right? Yeah. And it's not possible.
Yeah, we have a compulsion of service to be like, yes, I will do it. Yes. And if instead you just say, I think I can help you with that. Give me 20 minutes to think through what the options are and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
You don't always have to answer right away. It's okay to take time to reflect and to respond thoughtfully. And I think that if people take nothing else away from this conversation, it's okay to take time to recenter yourself, to think about the right response, to be thoughtful in some way, And it doesn't need to be an hour or a day. It can be 5 minutes to just think and reflect and not leave yourself in a state of reaction.
Yes, don't jump into the do right away and committing yourself to everything, right? We don't have
It's
to
hard
say,
when you're so busy because like, I gotta.
and you're in the back of your mind, you're already like, oh my God, everything else is falling. You can see everything falling off the plates. The balls are dropping left and right. And it's just not right. Great. Any other tips where you'd say that's something that works really well that people should be aware of?
I would say, I mentioned already that I think awareness is such an important skill to train. And it is one that we have to be effortful towards, because there is so much in our day-to-day lives that is conspiring to keep us distracted, right? Thinking about multiple things, looking at multiple things. And so there's a great deal of benefit in practicing the skill of being aware. And that when something difficult comes up, whether it's overwhelm or a difficult personal circumstance, a difficult caregiving circumstance, there is an opportunity for you to just notice and to name it and to be like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I'm sad. I'm distracted. I'm challenged. I'm mad. That's interesting. What's that about? And to become curious about what's going on. And then, you can also practice letting it go, which is kind of an additional part of the mindfulness practices, to be like, oh, look, it's there and now it's gone. There is a wonderful, it's not an article, it's like a sonnet or whatnot. It's called Don't Shoot the Second Arrow. Have you heard this one? Mm-mm. So they talk about how when something difficult happens, the pain that you feel, the anguish, the anxiety, that is the first arrow. And the second arrow is the rumination, the overthinking, and analyzing. And it is the suffering that comes from reflecting on, ruminating on that incident. And while the first arrow you can do nothing about, you can choose not to shoot the second arrow and to not suffer through the overthinking and the rumination. And that's kind of what I was just talking about earlier, of you can notice that the bad thing, the difficult thing, the anguishing thing has happened, and then you can also let it go. But that is something that takes ongoing practice, and everything that we've talked about takes practice and will get easier and harder as the ebbs and flows of your life happen. But just because it's difficult or it's not immediately easy does not mean it's not worth doing.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's actually, I think, probably a good spot to talk about the Mindfulness Incubator, because I think with a lot of the things that we talked about, you do offer a platform where women can find people, but I think women in particular can find support with all this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Mindfulness Incubator is a platform that is really intended to help support people live with more ease, more intention, more peace, more purpose. And there's a few ways in which that happens. So there is a blog that has new resources most weeks, lots of downloads and how-tos, and the topics run the gamut, right? There are articles on, okay, like, how do you endure when everything sucks and it's just really hard and you're in it? And how do you develop a hobby as an adult? And how do you declutter? So there's a range, but the common thread across all of them is, what are practical insights and tips that you can use to help manage your busyness, your overwhelm, and bring a little bit more joy and intention into your life. The second way is programs. So I mentioned briefly Time Boundary Blueprint, which is a program that was run at the beginning of the year that was really focused. It was a 4-week intensive experience that was geared towards helping people build an awareness of where, see that word again, awareness of where their time is going, to go through a step-by-step process to look for opportunities to free up time and then use that time in a way that is intentional and that is very present. And then the last piece is retreats. So there were 2 retreats last year. There will hopefully be more this year. That was a 3-night, 4-day digital detox and renewal retreat, very small, very intimate. And that was much more of an immersive experience, like get yourself out of your day-to-day and create the space to think about how you want to focus your time, your energy, and just also renew. Because I think there's, as professionals, as parents, as partners, as primary caregivers, and the people who generally carry the mental load for most things in life, it is rare to have the opportunity to be taken care of and to have space to reflect. And that's what these retreats are geared towards providing. And so there is a lot that is available on Mindfulness Incubator that is available to everyone and available at no charge. And then there's, a few additional programs that we run that are more targeted step-by-step, community-based interventions. So it's been a great journey. And I hope that my mom is proud and feels like her spirit is carried forward, and the way in which she lived with firepower and chutzpah is something that, many of us can learn from, for better and for worse.
Oh, I'm sure, because I think what you're doing is amazing. And really, everybody go check it out. It's mindfulnessincubator.com, and it's Mindfulness Incubator everywhere. I think social media, that's also your handle. And even the resources that are free, they're amazing. They really help people get small habit changes going. And then courses, I think that's always a great thing. If you want accountability, if you just want somebody to help you build that habit.
Because there's so much information out there. And sometimes it's like, how do you put it together in a way that will work for you?
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for the conversation, Stephanie. This was great.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to chat.
And we'll put everything in the show notes. You can check it out. Go check out the Mindfulness Incubator, and we'll see you next time.